Morning. My name is Scott Page, and I'm at the University of Michigan and the Santa Fe Institute. What I want to do today is talk about diversity, and I want to talk about the value proposition in diversity. But what I want to do is I want to do this in a very particular way. I want to talk about it in the context of the modern economy, in the context of a very complex world where there's tons of data, where we can do lots of analytics. And so this story is going to be very much couched, or this narrative, within a particular moment in time, which is the moment we're in right now. Now, you might think, because things are complex and because we've got lots of data, that we should be focusing on ability. And I want to argue that ability matters, but it's diversity that's really going to sort of bake the cake here. That's really going to be the thing that adds value to a company. Now, to do this, I want to go back and talk about something Laszlo talked about, which is Taylorism, or maybe in Brave New World, Fordism, right? The world that our grandparents were in was a world in which people chopped, riveted, and built. And that's what I like to think of as an additive world. So what do I mean by that? So think of a bunch of people working in in the lumber industry 150 years ago. You might assign an ability to each one of those people, which is like how many trees they could chop down. One person might chop down 10, one might chop down 8, one might chop down 12. The ability of that team is just the sum of the abilities of the people on that team. So if I want to build the best team, if I want to hire workers, what I can do is I can give them a test. How many trees can you chop down? And then I hire the best people. So the analytics were fairly simple. It wasn't complex. That's not the world we're in now. The world we're in now is a world where people think, where we innovate, where we pore over data and reports, where we try and come up with path-breaking new technologies. It's a world where we're looking at self-driving cars, right? So what do? We're going to hire a bunch of people. Astro is going to hire a bunch of people. They're going to sit around and they're going to think, right, about how do I make this self-driving car? So who do we hire? Well, we could think, okay, let's hire people with really high IQs. So let's give them some sort of test. And here's a bunch of people who all score really high on this test. They also happen to look the same, too. It's OK. Right? And then we can think, how good are these people together? Well, the point is they're not chopping down trees. So what we can't do is we can't say, well, let's just add up their IQs. And now we've got someone with an IQ of 438. Right? That doesn't happen. So we're in a non-additive, non-separable world. And when you think about how we staff teams, we can't just apply tests. So when you think about this, what you can show is the following. If the problem is hard, if the task is difficult, the best team doesn't consist of the best individual performers, right? So this is some work that I've done with Liu Hong, who's a mathematical economist. And when you write these things, they're sort of mathematical technical papers. And so we try to make them work in a way so that what Laszlo called them, the influencers in the room, can take this out. So a better way to put this is the following. Diversity trumps ability, right? Thank you. The only applause Trump will get probably in this area for months. OK, so here's another way to think about it. This is some work by John Kleinberg. And this is how my people speak. We talk about submodular and supermodular functions. That means hard. Okay? So what John showed in a recent paper with Maestro Agu is that suppose you got a really hard problem. Not only is the best team not consist of the best individuals on that problem, there's no test. There does not exist any task that you could give to people such that the best team would consist of the people who score highest on that test. So when you think about analytics for human resources, it's not a matter of giving a single test and choosing the best people. It's about using all sorts of different tests. And as Astro mentions, it's about thinking about what tools do people bring to problems. Or as Bob Seeger, Ann Arbor's very own, put it, I'm not a number, right? What you are is you're a vector of skills, experiences, and talents. So why is it now? Why is my argument based on now that the world is complex, that diversity matters? Well, this is something I like to call the John Milton problem. So Milton was born in 1608, and he's a remarkable man. He wrote in 7 languages. He read in 12 languages. He invented 600 words. 135 of them begin with un. So as an aside. In the peak of his career, the British Library held about 35,000 books. If you read 2 books a day for 50 years, you could get through all of them. And Milton came very close to doing that. He knew almost everything you could possibly know. Here's the catch. Last year, 53,000 papers in neuroscience. So Milton knew everything in 1638. He doesn't even know last year's neuroscience now, right? So we only know a small slice. So when you think about what diversity is, one thing diversity is just those particular things we know, right? But it's also our identities, right? So what I want to do is I want to talk about sort of how I think about why I'm not a number, why you're not a number, why people aren't numbers, and sort of all the things we are. So one thing we can think of ourselves as tools, right? We think of tool sets. So when I look at those people, working for Astro, building who knows what, self-delivering packages, right? You can say, what skills do they have? So I could look down her resume and I could say, wow, she knows latent Dirichlet analysis, so she can do semantic analysis. That'll be fantastic, right? And I can think because of this cognitive diversity, that's going to allow her, a group of people with cognitively diverse people, they're going to get better outcomes on these hard problems. So that makes sense. But when I think about the problems we face in the complex world, and think of James' talk just a moment ago, how do we achieve parity? It's not clear how you apply, spectral analysis, right, or calculus to achieve gender parity, right? It's going to be different types of cognitive diversity that are going to play a role. It's going to be experiences, information, knowledge, how you categorize the world, in addition to these tools. And so when we think about cognitive diversity, the difference is what I like to call sort of like inside the pumpkin. Those are affected by sort of surface level and deeper identity diversity as well, right? So cognitive diversity and identity diversity are really sort of birds of a feather. And let me explain how this works in a particular example. So let me take one of these things, categories. So categories are just how we make sense of the world. So here's some research based on, this is sort of an example based on some research by Jeffrey Johnson, who was looking at the indigenous people of St. Louis. If you've ever been there, this is a particular type of people. And these are some artifacts from St. Louis. If you've never been there, if these are confusing to you, that's fine. These are artifacts from St. Louis. And the techniques you use in these sort of situations to find out how people categorize the world, you say, put these in piles. This is called a pile sort. And so I'm classified by a cultural anthropologist as a bobo, a bourgeois bohemian from Ann Arbor who wears blue blazers. And I would place these in sort of a veggie category, an organic category, and then the sort of Michael Pollan says don't go there canned food category, right? I didn't grow up a bobo. Like my friend Jeff Polzer, I grew up in a hick in a rural area, and I dreamed of owning an Airstream trailer. That was like my goal. So did Matthew McConaughey, by the way. And the sort of like Airstream trailer sort of this is to have a veggie category, a meat fish category, and then a weird category. Like what the heck is hominy? What is arugula, right? I wouldn't have known what those things are. Why does this matter? Why does it matter how we sort things? The reason it matters is when we think about innovation, this is a word I'm going to borrow from Stephen Johnson, what we care about is the adjacent possible. So what's next to what we think about? So if somebody said, oh, we're out of canned salmon, what can we think of? My bobo self would think of fresh salmon. My Airstream self would think of Spam. All right, so let's think about how this diversity bonus works. Let's suppose we've got a bunch of people making a prediction. So this is an example from Jim Serwicki's book, The Wisdom of Crowds. 787 people are guessing the weight of a steer. The steer weighs 1,198 pounds. The average guess is 1,197 pounds. So they're within one. Why is it that crowds are better at making predictions? And Laszlo talked about this. Well, in my book, The Difference, I talk about a theorem you can write that basically says the crowd error equals the average error minus diversity. And this isn't one of those like feel-good things. This is one of those sort of like mathematical truth things, right? So what we know from all this work is that diverse teams should be better, but where's the proof? Is the proof, does it really exist? Is it in the pudding, so to speak? Well, if you look at academic papers, it turns out that group-authored papers, right, team-authored papers are 4.5 times as likely to get 100 citations. And if you look at why that's true, it's because they include novel ideas. They combine novel ideas. If you look at all patents, this is a measure not on the content of papers, but the people who write them. What you see is all patents and all papers, the very best ones are done by diverse teams. You also see that the worst ones are done by diverse teams. So one of the lessons here, which is so interesting, is like homogeneous teams, guys with blue blazers that all look the same, like so far that we've kind of all walked up, Laszlo, James, and I, we're the land of B pluses, right? If you get a whole bunch of us, you're just going to get a B plus. If you want an A, right, you've got to have a diverse team. And that's why, and we're going to get to this a lot later today, so I'm just going to end here, inclusion becomes so important. So when I look at my work in this area and how I think about this, I think the math and the diversity sort of shows us that diversity can add value, but the challenge is creating the workspace, creating the culture where you can achieve that value. All right, thank you.